I am very, very happy that I get to be part of today's class and not as a fat, older, poor man's Carson Daly. I met today's speaker a little over a year ago when I was in New York, and I was so blown away by who he is and what he has accomplished that I pledged that I would stalk him until he agreed to come back to his Michigan alma mater and speak to our students. And stalk him I did. Inder Singh is indeed a Michigan man, and he is the founder of Dance Marathon here. But he also holds a total of 5 degrees, including 3 graduate degrees from MIT and Harvard. To say that he is a sought-after speaker is a gross understatement. That's because Inder Singh is revolutionizing healthcare. Inder is currently the founder and CEO of Kinsa, which sells a smart thermometer that is the first ever FDA-cleared app-enabled thermometer. You may have seen this thermometer in your neighborhood Apple store, but more than likely you have not, because it is so popular it is frequently sold out. But the thermometer is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how Inder is changing healthcare. Kinsa is focused in the broadest ways on using technology to identify and prevent the spread of illness and disease on a global basis. And Inder knows what he's talking about in this space, because prior to founding Kinsa, he was the executive vice president of the Clinton Foundation's Health Access Initiative. In that role, he brokered deals between 70, that's 70 governments, and 22 pharmaceutical companies that resulted in nearly $1.5 billion in cost savings from lowered price drugs and diagnostics for HIV/AIDS, malaria, and TB. These cost savings allowed literally millions of people to receive life-saving treatment. Equally impressive, under Inder's leadership, his team was able to bring more than 25 rare pediatric drugs to market in under 5 years. If you know anything about the arduous task of bringing drugs to any market, this accomplishment is unprecedented. Inder is obviously a rock star, but he is not immune to the challenges of building a successful startup. I'm looking forward to his perspective, his insights, and his wisdom today, and you should be too. He is a frequent lecturer at Harvard and MIT, but now it's Michigan's turn. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm 407 welcome to Inder Singh.
Hey guys, thank you so much for that incredibly warm and generous introduction. It's really great to be back on campus. This is my first time back on North Campus in 15 years, and I'm really delighted to be here and see the massive number of changes. So Tom gave you a preview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm the founder and CEO of Kinsa. We make thermometers. Hopefully over the next 10 minutes, you'll come to understand why I am so passionate about making thermometers. Before I do, I just want to survey the audience just to understand who's here, and I can try to cater my points to you guys. How many of you guys are not Michigan students? A few of you, okay. For those of you that are Michigan students, how many of you guys are engineering students? How many of you guys want to start a company at some point in your career? Lots of you. How many of you guys have already tried to start something, some organization, not necessarily a company? Quite a few of you. Okay, cool. How many of you guys have heard of Dance Marathon at the University of Michigan? Cool, very cool. It's my first time coming back to see Dance Marathon in 12 years. I'm really excited to see it. How many of you guys are involved in Dance Marathon? I'm just curious. A few. Okay, cool. So guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Kinsa. I'm going to introduce Kinsa with a pitch that I gave almost 4 years ago that launched the company. And then I'm going to invite Tom back up and we're going to talk. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and give you the pitch for Kinsa. Imagine what we as a society could do if we could track the spread of disease in real time. For those of you out there scratching your head saying, can't we do that already? The answer is no, we're not even close. And it's one reason, for example, why influenza affects 1 in 5 people globally and kills up to 500,000 people each year. And oh, by the way, it killed more than 40,000 Americans last flu season because we had a bad vaccine. We started Kinsa with that problem, that broad problem in mind. And we thought to ourselves, how can we create a real-time map of human health to track and thereby support the stop of the spread of disease? We broke the problem down. And we thought to ourselves, how can we begin communicating with someone who's just fallen ill to help them make sure they can respond and get better fast, but at the same time to collect early indicators of illness that allow us to map human health. So we took the world's most ubiquitous, most common health product in the world, and we changed it, we transformed it. These are the world's smartest thermometers. We make both. And I'm going to show you what they do. Could you cue up the first video, please?
Mom, I don't feel so good.
There are no breaks in parenting. But at least there's Kinsa. In just 10 seconds, the Kinsa Smart Thermometer gives an accurate reading.
Reading complete.
And with a few simple taps, you can track symptoms, take pictures, and even record custom notes, so you have a full history of the illness. With everything you need to know about your child's illness right on your phone, you cut out the guesswork for a faster path to recovery. You can also see what's going on around his school and offer that information to your pediatrician to help guide your next steps. A doctor with knowledge of strep going around is more likely to order a throat culture sooner. Pediatrician recommended, affordable, simple to use, and designed with parents and kids in mind. The Kinsa Smart Thermometer and app, to keep track of your whole family's health. FDA-cleared for even the biggest kids.
So that was the first product we launched almost 18 months ago. That's this product. It connects to your phone via the headphone jack. It has no power, processor, or LCD. We use the phone for everything. What does that mean for those of you that are in engineering? It means over time, as we achieve volumes, this is the least expensive electronic thermometer ever made. So that's the version that connects directly, physically, via the headphone jack. And I'm going to show you this version, which we launched about 6 months ago. This is a Bluetooth ear version. Can you play the second video, please?
Meet Charlie and Amy. They love their kids, and half the time, they think they're killing it as parents. The other half, they're doing their best just to keep everyone alive. Like you, they just want to be the greatest parents they can be. They don't want their kids to get hurt. And they always try their hardest to keep them healthy. Hey, buddy. But no matter what they do,
I don't feel so good.
the kids get sick from time to time. And that really worries them. Kinsa knows how awful it can feel to worry about your kids, especially when they're not feeling 100%. The Kinsa Smart Ear Thermometer tells you your kid's temperature right away, in just 1 second, which is great during the day, or at 3 a.m., when everything seems to happen with kids. So, when your kid is sick, and you're not sure what to do, Kinsa can help. Sometimes sleep-deprived parents will be a little fuzzy on the details, but Kinsa won't be. Questions like, how high did the fever get, or when can I give the next dose, are stored for reference later. Updates can even be shared instantly with anyone looking after your child. If anything, Kinsa makes those all-too-common sick kid situations less stressful, reassuring you that you're doing the right thing, so you can worry about everything else that comes with kids growing up, like explaining the birds and the bees, surviving summer camp, their first cell phone, driver's ed, student loans, their first job interview, getting married.
So we launched that last product with a blog called How to Be a Dad. They loved that ending, so we kept it in there. Those are the products. You never knew you could ask your thermometer the questions you really cared about when you or your child fell ill. Those questions are not, is it 102, is it 102.5? Those questions are, how do I get better faster? What's going around that I might have? Is this serious? Those are the kinds of questions you really care about in that moment. And we go to people in their moments of physical and emotional need to answer those questions. That's why we believe that this is a much more powerful consumer experience and a much more powerful tool to respond to illness. And the really interesting thing about the thermometer is it is the very, 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 very first device that anyone goes to when they fall ill. If an adult is using a thermometer, they feel pretty ill. And if a parent is using a thermometer, they're concerned about their child's health. So this is the way to begin communicating with the just fallen ill, helping them, at the same time collecting those early indicators of illness that advance our broader mission, creating a map of human health to track and thereby help stop the spread of disease. I'm happy to give you some more information about why that problem is so huge, and I'll just give you a couple quick stats so you understand the scope of the problem. The world allocates hundreds of billions of dollars trying to curb, stop, or prevent the spread of disease. And these are multiple GDP points globally. And it does so with almost zero information about where and when disease is spreading. And I've witnessed this firsthand. I remember I was in Geneva at the World Health Organization, and there was a donor that was allocating money. And I was there at the final board meeting where they were allocating $200 million in under 2 hours. And I remember watching them allocate money. And I got up there and said my minute-and-a-half spiel, because I was one of the consultants there, and sat back down in the corner and watched them. And I remember someone coming up there and saying, and I'm trying to protect the organization a little here, but I'll give you a little detail. I remember someone coming up and saying, there are 280 million cases of malaria in the world, and here's where they are. And those are the numbers I knew. Those are the World Health Organization stats. I knew those. Then the next person came up, a Harvard professor, and said, no, there's over 1 billion cases of malaria in the world, and here's where they are. They're operating from the same information, data set, and there's a 3x plus difference in their assessment of how much malaria existed in the world and where it was. That's crazy. And I remember watching this go on, and I got very frustrated. I'm not the most patient person in the world. I got very frustrated, and I pulled out my phone. I'm like, I need to get to my next meeting, right? So I was looking at Google Maps at the time, and I'm watching him allocate money. I'm looking at Google Maps, and I'm watching him allocate money. And I thought to myself, wow, how are we in the dark ages when it comes to real-time information for the health situation around us? We've got so much real-time information in the world. Google Maps, Waze, et cetera, let me get downtown as fast as possible. Zillow and Trulia tell me what my neighbor's house costs in real time. On Facebook, I know what my friend feels like in real time. How come we're not applying those same tools to health? And that was the first step towards Kinsa way long ago. A year later, I fell very ill. And I realized that this big grand system problem, this big grandiose problem, the what's going around question that was hampering our system from working really efficiently, was also the same question that a parent asks. I personally fell very ill and couldn't get better, failed 2 antibiotic regimens. And at that point, I decided to go online. I did what any normal person would do. I said, I have flu-like symptoms. Someone has to have given it to me. We have to have gotten it from the common source. Maybe they can help me get better. And I went online, and I found nothing. And I found a lot of scary information, frankly, going to symptom trackers on WebMD, et cetera, that told me that I might be dying. And I was like, OK, I'm not dying, but something is severely happening. So the point here is we're in the dark ages, and that's where Kinsa started. I'm really proud of these products. They have won 8 national awards in design, technology, and parenting. They appeared in an Apple television commercial before we launched. Apple thought the design was so cool. And they're selling really, really well. So guys, that's the introduction to Kinsa. And with that, I'll bring Tom back up on stage. Thanks.
So Inder, every entrepreneur has a journey. And you shared a little bit of your life story with me when I met. Which is context for the Kinsa story. Would you mind telling the class a little bit about your life story?
Sure. Kinsa was born in many ways way back here at the University of Michigan. I had a life-changing experience that happened with starting Dance Marathon. And you'll have to excuse me for a moment. I sometimes get a little emotional when I think back to this experience, so I may need to pause here, Tom.
Sorry, this is like my Oprah moment right off the bat.
Yeah.
Please come back so I can make you cry in front of all the students.
There's a story. There was a moment when during the first Dance Marathon, and I remember standing back and watching these parents on stage. For those of you guys that don't know what this does, Dance Marathon supports children undergoing extensive physical rehabilitation. I'm really proud of being associated with the organization. It's generated millions of dollars to support them, and it's channeled hundreds of thousands of volunteers to support these kids. That first marathon back in '98, I remember sitting back and looking up on stage, and there were these 2 parents talking about their miracle child. This child, a little girl named Allison Lawrence, who was 4 years old when her heart stopped beating for 41 seconds. Heart stopped beating for 41 seconds. And I remember listening to them talk about how Allison, she literally couldn't move when she came out of, they revived her with an experimental therapy, and she literally couldn't move. She could move her eyes barely, but she was staring at them blankly. Over the course of several years, she relearned to speak, she relearned to walk, she relearned to move. Imagine being a parent of a small child and having to go through that experience. And I'm watching them up on stage, and there's tears across the entire audience. And I remember this tug on my pants. And I remember this tug on my pants, and I look down, and I see smiling, shining Allison Lawrence's face looking up to me, pointing at the stage, going, "That's me." And that moment completely changed my life. Sorry. It was her look and the look in the kids, the look in the eyes of the kids and the parents that year. And I said, I want that. How do I do that again? That's awesome. I want to have that kind of impact on people. So instead of going to grad school, I ended up going out to the Bay Area, and I said, I was armed with my idealism. I'm like, I want to build companies and organizations that make an impact in the world. How do I do that? So I went out there armed with a bunch of idealism. 4 years later, 4 startups later, I learned a ton. It was hugely infectious energy. I learned a ton and had a great time being out in the Bay Area. But what I discovered was it wasn't for me. I discovered that I'd become this very narrowly defined software architect. I was a Java software architect working for a B2B company, doing customer relationship management, thinking, this is the place that I'm going to achieve my career path and my dreams. And it was great. It was fun. This was the Web 1.0 era. I saw the boom, I saw the bust, and everything in between. This was 1998 to 2001. And the experience was amazing, but I didn't find that satisfaction that I was seeking. I just didn't find it. For me, that satisfaction came from the look in someone's eyes. It came from knowing that I and my organization had an impact on people. It didn't come from making a company bigger or better or richer. It just didn't. That was not me, right? And I was looking for that kind of satisfaction. So over the course of the next, and the reason I tell you guys this story is because I got lost, completely and utterly lost in my career. For the next 5 years, I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to figure out how to find this intersection of entrepreneurship and social impact. Ended up traveling around the world for 5 months, trying to find myself. Ended up getting 3 graduate degrees. No one needs 3 graduate degrees. You just don't need them. It's completely ridiculous that I have 3 graduate degrees. But through the course of that...
Pay no attention to the man if you're thinking about... No, just kidding.
Yeah. But through the course of that, I found my place in the world. And so I want to be really honest with you guys and telling you, I've had a great career, but it took me a while to figure out where to go. And it was a very, very winding path. So I became very passionate about infectious disease specifically. So let me take a big step back. I will tell you there are 3 lessons that I learned while here at the University of Michigan and in starting Dance Marathon that have affected my ability to succeed as an entrepreneur. And I would encourage you guys to seek out opportunities, extracurricular activities while you're here at the University of Michigan that allow you to understand how to motivate people, that allows you to understand how an organization is actually founded and formed. And I'll just go to those. I have some slides on this somewhere. Let's see. Here we go. Passion and persistence, they absolutely matter. Whoever tells you that starting a company or starting an organization is easy is lying to you, or is so extraordinarily lucky because they had an easy path. They're 1 in a million. It's really, really hard starting an organization. Passion and persistence matter. And when you're passionate about the problems you're trying to solve, it's infectious. Other people will be passionate about those problems. I learned that through Dance Marathon, and it's the thing that's driven me through the Clinton Foundation and through Kinsa ever since. The second thing I learned is you really have to understand incentive structures in the world. You have to understand what makes other people tick. The thing I learned at Dance Marathon was trying to figure out how to motivate someone. Being in college, this is a nonprofit organization at college, right? We're not paying anybody. So you have to get people to do things and work massive amounts of hours, even when they have classes and they have other incentives. So there was a real question of how can you get 100, 200 people to dedicate a big, significant portion of their life. And that came down to sharing ownership. So I remember the key lesson I learned around motivating people had to do with the fact that you have to seed other people with the idea and make sure they own it. So even if you know what the next steps are, you need to make sure they feel like it's their idea. And if it's their idea, they're much, much more likely to actually own the idea and move it forward and continue to be passionate and persistent about getting the job done. And that was a lesson I learned in terms of trying to get, there's a bunch of people that came out to help us to begin with, and they lost motivation. So you have to figure out how to actually get them to own the idea again and come back. So the reason why I wanted to tell you this is because I think there's a lot of opportunity here at the university to explore and to learn these kinds of lessons. There's a very big difference between me telling it to you and you actually learning it tacitly so that you in your heart know how it actually works and how to do it. Take those opportunities while you're here, because there's a lot of those kinds of opportunities, whether those are extracurricular activities or potentially even through research. But take those opportunities. I'm grateful for those opportunities because they taught me a lot. So in any case, back to the life story. I ended up going to the Clinton Foundation, applying those lessons. So the biggest skill that I had at the Clinton Foundation was this incentive structure lesson that I had learned at Dance Marathon. How do I actually get people in the world to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do? And that's how we would do, whenever we were at the Clinton Foundation trying to think about this big, hairy problem that everyone said no one could resolve. How do you get the price of drugs for AIDS down 95%? How do you improve the quality of drugs for people that are in underserved communities because they didn't have the right drug formulations? How do you create the incentive structures for massive institutions and the individuals who lead them and the individuals who operate the various different functional groups? How do you get them to actually do things that they said from the outset they would never do? And to go to a CEO of a company, a major pharmaceutical company, and say, you need to drop the price of your drugs by 90% next year, no one's going to do that, right? No one's going to do that. So again, it all came down to understanding what made the organization tick, what made those individuals tick, and thinking about the incentive structures and turning capitalism kind of on its head. So that was the core learning from Dance Marathon that I applied at the Clinton Foundation. My team at the Clinton Foundation, we started with 8 people. It grew to a group of about 120, and we did some great things in the world. But all of it was, we would go through this exercise of identifying what the biggest problems were and then doing this very extensive incentive mapping exercise. What does the CEO of this company care about? What does the head of R&D at this company care about? So for example, to give you a very simple example of incentive mapping at the Clinton Foundation, and this is going to come back to Kinsa in a moment, and I know that I'm going on for a while here. So.
No, you're making my job easy today. Keep going. I wish you had some strong opinions.
As an example of how you think about that, so for some of these large pharmaceutical companies, especially for some of these smaller pharmaceutical companies that were trying to become large, what they cared about, and many of you guys that are working in that are studying industrial engineering will understand this, is they cared about factory utilization. That's what they really cared about. It was not, is the margin on this product high or low? It was factory utilization. Because if we can get the factory to be utilized, then we have a big base of operations that we can leverage to get to higher margin products. But we need to make sure that the investment that we've put down for this factory is paying off. So they cared about factory utilization and they cared about break even. Right? So we would leverage that. We would say, hey, listen, we will go to 10 countries, we'll aggregate demand and volume across those countries, and we want you to bid on this product. And we want you to bid on this product knowing that there's a market out there, but you're going to have to compete with 3 other companies to get the price down. Those volume-based discounts that we were seeking, those volume-based agreements that we were seeking resulted in 50, 60, 70% decreases in the price of products instantaneously. All we were doing was aggregating demand. But we had to first understand what the incentive structure of those companies were, and which companies actually cared about this, and which companies were past this time frame in doing this. I hope that's a helpful example. I'm happy to talk about other examples and elucidate these issues, but the key point here is you had to map incentives to get people to do what they otherwise wouldn't do.
I think that makes sense for the students, but one of the things that they struggle with sometimes is how do you figure that out initially? For example, that capacity and the issue with the factories, like how do you get to figuring out what their problems are? Did you follow a particular process there?
Yeah, I mean, so in thinking about, so let me wrap up my personal story. I apologize, and then I'll come back to here. When I was at the Clinton Foundation in my final years, I told you the story when I was up on stage about how I was just incredibly frustrated. That's where Kinsa was born. I will tell you that I firmly believe that my initial investors gave me the first $2 million. It was me, a PowerPoint presentation, and a breadboarded idea with a thermometer that came from one of my technology colleagues.
Oh God, don't tell them that. I tell them they can't get money that way, so.
We got $2 million. We got $2 million, we got it. It took me 7 months. I didn't have any salary for 7 months. It took me
Once
7
again,
months.
disregard what the man is saying. So.
But we raised $7 million, and I think that the investors believed that we could figure out the incentive structure in the world to actually solve the problem and monetize it in a big way. And it was all came down to this kind of work. How do you map incentives? How do you create business models that allow you to achieve a social impact mission? Because I'm ultimately driven by my mission, not necessarily by the motivation of making a buck, right? And my investors know that. So how do I make sure that I create a business model that aligns those two interests? And
You need to
that's-
speak more to that, though, because you walk a fine line between having investors that expect a return and, do good. So where is that balance for Kinsa?
Yeah, so I think the word balance is not the right word. We created a business model around a social problem. And that business model was sell hardware, sell software. The idea is that through the product itself, we can connect you with the right medicines and the right doctors. We make money off of that. Rather than you paying the copay to your doctor, you pay the copay through our system, in the software, in real time. The moment you need a doctor, you click yes, and you talk to the doctor right through the phone. And we take a small cut of that transaction. We're just a channel. We're just a channel. If we don't operate that business, somebody else does, but we take a cut of that. So that's how we make money as an example in the software. And then we make money on the data. And the idea behind the data is we're trying to create the health weather, a real-time understanding of what's going around and how it affects you. And the weather business is a huge business. The health weather business, we believe, is a huge business too. And so we wrapped a business model around ultimately what was at its core a social agenda. And we pitched it. And making sure that what was really important in that case was not balance. It was actually aligning the investor's investment thesis with our mission, which means I did not accept money from medical device investors who wanted me to sell a device. I did not accept money from healthcare investors who wanted me to provide services through the app. I accepted money from people who had a big data investment thesis. They wanted the data. They believed the data was really valuable. So the investors had a thesis that was perfectly aligned with my mission. And that was really critical to thinking about that. Again, thinking about the incentive of the investor. If you have a fund and the fund is dedicated to big data, you're going to invest in big data concepts. If your fund is dedicated to medical device and healthcare, you're going to potentially force me to pivot and monetize heavily the device or the services. Yes, we will do that, but that's all en route to the bigger opportunity in data. Is this making sense? I'm fearing that folks are not familiar with the VC landscape, et cetera. Okay.
No, we're good there.
Great.
In speaking to that social mission, it's so obvious that you're so passionate about helping people and empowering them through giving them these tools to monitor their health and then the health of their communities as well. And I saw in one of your interviews on Startup Health that you said that you want to, in the future, so 10 years down the line, you want to be able to offer these products at no cost to people in developing worlds.
Yeah, that's right. So again, this product's got wires, 5 resistors, and plastic, and a metal tip, and a TRS plug. That's about it. So it's the least expensive connected product ever made. It's the least expensive electronic thermometer ever made. Let me go back to that first point. You name the connected product in the world, the Fitbit, the Tiles, the Jawbones, this is the least expensive product ever made. At volumes, we will hopefully be able to show that we're monetizing the software and the data in a big enough way that we can potentially give this away for free. We're already doing that. We have a one-for-one program where we give this away to schools. I refuse to announce the company until we could get the BOM cost of this product down to a low enough level, the bill of materials, right, down to a low enough level that we believed that in the long term we could actually give it away. That's the day that I did the pitch that you just heard at the beginning. It was the day that we did that pitch is when we could get the BOM cost down that low.
So let's say you want to give away a lot of these at a large volume by 2020. Sure. In the year 2020, there will still be 2 billion people in the developing world that don't have access to smartphones. So they won't be able to use this technology. How do you plan on helping these people who may be at the biggest risk for malaria, which is predicted by fevers, which these tools can help predict?
Yeah. So to be clear, the real brilliant idea behind the product is not that we get real-time geolocated fever data, which in and of itself is really helpful to track the spread of flu in some parts of the world, to track the spread of malaria in some parts of the world, and to track the spread of pneumonia in some parts of the world. The real brilliant idea behind this is that we're communicating with someone who's just fallen ill. That's the real brilliant. We've turned a thermometer into a communication device, much in the same way that Apple and Samsung have turned a phone into a multi-channel communication device, right? Talking on the phone is now number 6 on the list of how you use a smartphone. It's still called a phone, it's no longer a phone, right? So we're turning a thermometer into a communication device with DL. That's the brilliant idea, and it's working. We took a huge leap of faith 4 years ago, and we're collecting all sorts of data in terms of symptoms, illnesses, et cetera. It actually works, which is really cool. But to answer that question, to sort of get to the heart of that question, smartphone technology is the fastest diffusion of technology in history. 4 or 5 years after smartphones were introduced, we were seeing 70% plus penetration in the US. In Singapore, we were seeing 95% plus penetration. It's the fastest diffusion of any technology in history. So do I believe we're catching the wave as the technology, like we're building this off of smartphones, we're catching the wave at the right point, right? You'll often hear entrepreneurs being like, I was too early, or I was too late. We think we're at the right time frame, right? Right as that technology is starting to take root and people are using their phone for everything, we are now trying to create this connected product that communicates with your phone. So we think we're catching the wave at the right point. Do we have to be in rural Kenya for this?
Wait, was when you caught the wave part of your original strategy or good fortune?
I think it was good fortune partly. I think it was being realistic about whether this product would sell and evaluating that up front. Like, could this product sell in the right time frames? I thought we were probably 6 months late in terms of catching the wave, but that's not a long time, right? You're still hitting the wave at the right time. I think we've lost another 6 months, to be, if I'm really honest with myself. So, you know, I wish I was here. It takes a lot longer to develop hardware products than you ever possibly imagine. It really is hard, especially an FDA-cleared product. And so we lost a little bit of time. I wish we would have been faster to market, faster to marketing, faster to selling through Apple stores and Target and Best Buy. And so I think we're still in the right zone. And we're certainly ahead of anybody else who's thinking about smartphone connected, low-cost healthcare products. But I think we lost a little bit of time.
Are there features or functions that you cut to hit your ship date that still haunt you at night?
Yeah, there are. There's a number of them. Well, rather than tell you that, I'll tell you something that's public. So Apple didn't change. Technically, they don't say it, they changed it. The iPhone 6 introduced a slightly different configuration to the headphone jack that was compliant with all of what they said they were. In most headphone jacks, you actually have a little bit of metal that is actually right there at the base of the TRS plug. Most headphone jacks of any kind have that. And Apple never wanted that. They wanted plastic covering that little tiny bit that's right there. And ours had metal exposed. It shorted. It shorted the inner workings of this. And it shorted it in such a way where we had to go and replace people's products and introduce it. And you know, I wish we would have known that design.
And scared the hell out of the parents too. Your child is dead. So.
Well, it didn't short it. Thankfully, it didn't short it in an electrical, like, yeah. So we met all those regulations. It just wasn't giving you readings, right? It wasn't giving you readings. The product didn't work well. But those are that's a public example of a problem that we faced where, you know, had we made different decisions, we could have potentially cut time off of. We could have continued to sell the existing product. We wouldn't have had to go back and fix it. We wouldn't have had to write off all of our existing inventory and replace those products.
You're scaling really fast. How are you doing as a CEO and growing a company this quickly?
I have gray hair in my beard only for the last 2 years, man. It's tough. My wife and I got married 3 years ago, and she's like, "I didn't marry a man with gray in his beard. Like, what's going on with you?" And it's stressful. It's surprisingly stressful because I've been through 4 startups before. I just never was the founder and CEO. I've started nonprofit organizations. There's been some high pressure situations at the Clinton Foundation. For whatever reason, when it's your baby, you take that stress on more and more. And I remember reading an article when I started Kinsa about, at the time, the founder of, I can't remember what, there were 2 suicides in the entrepreneurial community. 2 founders and CEOs had killed themselves. And I remember reading an article about how founders tend to take on the world on their shoulders. They have these acute emotional swings up and acute emotional swings down. Like within one day, you can feel this elated and completely and utterly depressed such that you can't even do work. And I remember reading this article and I'm like, this is never gonna happen to me. I'm like, I've been through startups before. This is never gonna happen to me. I was the first employee of a startup, right? This is never gonna happen to me. A year and a half later, I remember talking to my girlfriend at the time, and she's like, man, you swing really hard in terms of your emotions. And I'm like, really? And I thought about it, and I was experiencing that very thing. And ever since then, for the last three years, you will feel acute swings of emotion up and down. If you really believe in the cause, you will feel that. And so just be prepared, guys. Starting a company and running a company is not an easy thing. I'll just give you one more story. So I dragged one of my best colleagues from the Clinton Foundation.
Curious though, is that the one you married or did you get rid of that one because you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Okay.
That was the one I married, yeah. She's incredibly
Important clarification.
Yeah, she's incredibly supportive. So as a friend of mine likes to say, the most important thing in deciding to start a company is whether your spouse is supportive or not, right? If your spouse is not supportive, do not start a company. Do not do it. I remember I dragged one of my colleagues from the Clinton Foundation to Kinsa with me, one of my most trusted colleagues, this amazing systems thinker, brilliant project manager, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person, and this wonderful woman I dragged into technology with me. And I remember her coming to me 4 months ago, and she goes, you know, Inder, and she was saying this, smiling. She goes, if there's one thing I've learned while being at Kinsa, it's that I never want to be a startup CEO. I never want to be it. I've seen what you go through. I never want to be it. It's hard. It's hard.
John is out there with the rest of the class. John, do you want to see if we have questions out there?
Any questions that you guys want to ask? Sure.
So nowadays there's been a big development in like everyday health monitoring with cell phones and smartwatches. Do you guys plan on incorporating this into your Kinsa app at all?
So we made a big decision early on not to take form factor risk. So everyone's talking about flexible electronics. Let's put a patch on somebody, on a child, to sort of monitor temperature. Let's create a new form factor which can monitor all your health through a watch. The challenge is that no one's perfected that model. A lot of that is fashion, right? I mean, if you look at Misfit wearables or you look at Fitbit, they're going after an audience that cares about being cool and cares about being part of the latest trend. I mean, it's a marketing vehicle. So we decided early on that we didn't want to take that risk. We didn't want to take the risk on a fad. We didn't want to take the risk on a form factor. All we wanted to do was to give you a smarter, better, cheaper version of a product you were already familiar with. And that's why we went with these products. These are just smarter, better, modern-looking versions of the stick thermometer, which everyone in the world is familiar with, and the ear thermometer, which almost every millennial parent is familiar with. So that was the decision early on. Building a hardware business has a lot of broad risks, right? Because you've got, in addition to technology risk, in addition to patent and IP risk, you have manufacturing risk, you have supply chain risk, you have regulatory risk, which is pretty intense in the healthcare industry at least, and even for consumer electronics, which have FCC regulations. So you have a broad set of risks. And as an entrepreneur, it becomes hard to manage a broad set of risks with a small number of people when you're trying to bootstrap a company. And so we wanted to eliminate one of those key risks, which was the market risk around fads and the market risk around form factors. Does that make sense?
I have a quick question for you. So as a startup founder, and for lack of not using a pun, you're always taking the temperature of the greater entrepreneurial ecosystem.
You just used a really bad pun, though.
How do you build your identity between wanting to move on to the next idea towards your mission, perhaps that's in another company, and sticking it out and making sure you meet the goals with Kinsa?
So I am not the person who wants to go build the next company. I'm the person who wants to build this company. There are people who want to just sort of start multiple different organizations over time, and I was that person perhaps a long time ago. This is what I'm committed to.
I see AJ's got his hand up. Have you had any customer feedback that surprised you? I mean, you're a product that's anchored in the concept of trust, and if there's a violation of trust. So for example, Jessica Alba, the Honest Company, getting hammered today because maybe she has chemicals in her not so honest detergent, that can take that company out. I mean, that can have a significant impact. Has there been any customer feedback or concerns around the trust relationship that you're building that?
It's interesting. A lot of people ask us, well, hey, you're taking health information. So that's really sensitive, and you have to comply with HIPAA regulations, but there's a huge trust factor, and I absolutely agree, there's a huge trust factor. Facebook or Google or others may talk about privacy as one of their top priorities. It has to be one of our top priorities for us to succeed, because we're talking about health information. It absolutely must be. So we made some decisions early on around the product user experience. We do not ask you for your email address by default. We do not ask you for a login. We do not ask you for anything that is really sensitive. We don't ask you for whether you've been diagnosed with X or Y serious chronic illness. We ask you for fever and common symptoms. And we get you into the app and get you comfortable with using it right away. Eventually, we will have a login for advanced features, but we're not doing that by default. And my answer to the question is really simple. Yep, we meet all regulations, but go use the app. Just go check it out. We don't ask you for any intimate information at all, right? Our business model is predicated not on knowing you. Our business model is predicated on knowing the population, right? So our incentive structure, again, is very different. We don't care about advertising necessarily to you. We care about the health weather, right? That's the business model.
Okay, so now we're in this sci-fi movie, and as we all know, the government's leaning on Apple to break this phone. You identify a wildly spreading epidemic outbreak of something, and the government wants you to put a lid on it. What's Inder going to do?
And the government wants me to put a lid on it. So I'm a big believer that integrity matters, and if you do the right thing by the population that is your customer, it'll work out. It might hit you really hard in the near term, but it'll work out. I'm a big believer in that. Time and time again, I've seen companies that have made the wrong decision, and they reap shareholder value in the near term, and they get hit massively in the long term. And so I'm a big believer that you do the right thing. And you know, there's oftentimes you've got to thread the needle, right, to make sure you're doing the right thing but complying with regulations, because the government is an important actor that can shut you down. But that's, I think it's really about threading that needle. Do the right thing.
AJ.
Could you talk more about how you have and continue to deal with those emotional ups and downs as a startup founder CEO?
How do you deal with the emotional ups and downs? Man, first, find the people in your life that are really supportive of you, and make sure they're clear that you're going through them. So when I started Kinsa, I had to make I'll be really, really transparent with you. I had to make a decision what was important in my life, because I knew that this was going to be 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. I knew it. Like, I knew it because I'd been through enough startups. I didn't know the emotional ups and downs. I did know that it was going to take a lot of effort. And I had to prioritize. And Kinsa was one of my top 3 priorities, and my wife was my #1 priority. And she has been with me through thick and she works at Kinsa. So I actually work with her. I see her 24/7. My dog comes to work with me. Like, the whole family is together every single day. It's crazy. So she's just been really, really supportive. I was very, very lucky to have somebody in my life that I really cared about that was able to help me get through the emotional ups and downs. She leaves me alone when I'm depressed. She comes and tries to make sure that when I'm excited, she makes sure we go out and actually see other friends, etc. So she's really supportive.
Going off of that and the challenges of being a founder, how important is building a good team? Because delegation is such an important thing for a founder. You can't manage it all. So how did you go about finding members for your team?
So first I would tell you, do not ever start a company by yourself. Just don't do it. It's too hard. It's really, really too hard. I knew that going into this, and I had a couple colleagues that were going to help me, but they were never full-time. You want to go into it with full-time, fully committed people. You should have 95% trust in their capability and their functional area. If you don't, then don't go through the fire with them. But you need to trust them. You really need to trust them in their area. And again, don't try it by yourself. I'm a sole founder, and it's hard. So start with a team. Don't build a team, start with a team. If you're building a team, the challenge here is finding experts that are willing to come and help you at a reasonable cost, because you're usually bootstrapping it for the first couple years. So even with $2 million, we're a hardware company. We got to go find a factory. We got to invest in non-recurring engineering costs. We got to go build a hardware product. We got to get the FDA regulations. Those are expensive things, really expensive things. So I remember, I'll just give you the real stats. It was me, and it was a couple technologists who were instrumental in inventing the product and getting it off the ground. They funded the early phases of the company, but they were never full-time. We raised $2 million then. When we raised the additional $2 million, there were 8 of us. There were 6 people who were very junior, but really smart, 2-3 years out of school, super, super smart, super hardworking, but we're not veterans in any of the competency areas that we wanted. We raised another $2 million then. We had 14 people, with 1 person who was modestly senior. That was the person I dragged from the Clinton Foundation, when we raised an additional $7.6 million, and now we are 31 people. Now I have colleagues who've been there and done it. And I'll tell you, the best way to recruit people is to tell your story. Just tell your story over and over and over again. If you're passionate about the problem, other people will be passionate about the problem, and they'll come and help you. Now, the challenge is finding the right people who are technically expert and meet your culture and are passionate about your mission. Finding that intersection is so hard, I can't tell you. It's so hard to find that intersection.
And you recently moved your company out to the Valley. Do you find that you have greater competition for the talent that you want?
So it's interesting. We moved out to the Valley because we were looking at the intersection of expert, senior level, VP level talent for healthcare, hardware, and software. Software, you can find senior level talent in many places in the world. Healthcare, some places, but not where we were necessarily. New York was not a great place to find people that had early stage experience, that had built version 1.0s and scaled them to version 10.0s. New York's a place where you can find people who've built version 100s and scaled them to version 500s, not version 1s to version 10 in healthcare, at least, in my experience. In hardware, it's almost impossible to find people that have scaled version 1.0s to version 10s outside of the Bay Area. It's really, really hard. And so we decided to go there for the senior level talent. I will tell you, the mid-level talent is far harder for us to get in the Bay Area than it was in New York.
Okay, we are running up against the end of class. There's one
sorry.
question patiently waiting here, and then we're going to wrap.
So it seems like your hardware is tied directly into the phone market, specifically the iPhone. How do you protect yourself against, say, like a dip in the iPhone market?
So this is a question about competitive barriers to entry, and I think it's really important, again, to think through incentive structures. What are the competitive barriers to entry for the industry? What are the competitive barriers to entry for everything? So we have some cool IP, first of all. We have some patents. But the more interesting opportunity has to do with the network effect we're creating, right? You guys have heard the term network effect? Who's here heard that term? The more people who use the platform, the more value there is to the individual person. The more people who use our product, the more value there is to the parent because she or he now knows what's going around at her child's school or in her local area. There's a network effect there. That's powerful. There's also some interesting structure of the market. If you go into a pharmacy and you look at thermometers, you'll find exactly two. The local brand, Walgreens or CVS, and the premium brand. Well, we're taking the premium category, and we'll figure out how to support Walgreens and CVS to have a Kinsa-powered low-end product eventually. Does that make sense?
Okay, Inder, thank you very much. I feel like we could spend another hour, so I think you need to come back again sometime before.
Thanks, guys.
Another 15 years.
Convenience is really the play here. And so we saw two major demographics when we were talking to people that were really attracted to this. One was the 20 to 30, and the other was an older demographic that makes more money. And we thought the 20 to 30 have fewer options to choose from because of their lower economic
You're running out of time, Adrian.
Great.
If you've got
Okay.
a question,
Got it.
Put it in their apartment building.
Wage pit.